Doing well, thanks, mate. Thank you for taking the time to chat. You're in your mastering studio there. Is that where you're at?
That's it. Yep, in Los Angeles, California.
Is that in your home or is that at Becker Mastering? Whereabouts is that?
Yeah, I'm in my home studio.
Nice. So when you're working, because I know you've got your own mastering business, but you also do a lot of work
hmm
with Becker Mastering. Do you tend to do it all from your home studio, or when you're working with Becker Mastering, do you go into those studios? How does that work?
So I'm staying 4 days a week over at the Beckers from Tuesday to Friday, and that's like all day Becker stuff, which is great, fun, exciting.
Yeah.
And I schedule my business around that. And I've gotten the room to a point where I just really love, and it's translating really well with what we hear over at Becker. So it's just been amazing. I mean, I've got the IB1s here, the PMCs with my trusted Lynx Hilo, and it's just been awesome.
Right. How long did it take you to get everything set up, do you think?
Oh man, it's been a long journey. I mean, I started with your typical HS5 Yamahas years ago, and man, it's been almost a decade of just like
Wow.
upgrading. So yeah.
Wow. And where do you even know where to start? Like, do you have someone guiding you? Do you have resources that you always go to for, to get the latest information? How do you even go about just slowly building that?
That is such a good question. I feel like when you the least important things are the things that are the most appealing to people. Like, oh, I got to get the latest tube gear or whatever and stuff. And all of that, people are investing thousands of dollars before their room even sounds like accurate and beautiful. So if I were to go back and tell myself, I'd just say, man, it's a converter, amazing speakers, and the room. That's the most important thing.
That's the main thing, right? Okay, isn't that interesting? Because that's the kind of stuff which you probably don't get taught. You've got to figure out for yourself.
It's just through experience. If you can't hear what this latest cool piece of gear is doing, then it's worthless. If you can't hear what the tubes are doing, it's worthless. So you need to be able to hear before you invest in anything else.
Right. Wow. Which makes that process that you went through so important of just setting everything up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So before we sort of start getting, deep into the weeds with mastering, your career is in mastering and also a lot of the hardware and software that you use. I'm really interested about your path into the profession and
hmm
particularly the years you spent in Brazil growing up, because I understand you grew up in Denver a little bit, but also spent a lot of time in Brazil. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. I was in Denver up till like 10, from 6 to 10. And right starting fifth grade, I went back to Brazil.
Right. So were you born in Brazil?
Yeah, I was born in Brazil, and then when I was 6, we moved to Denver,
Okay.
learned English and all that stuff, and then we went back.
What was that transition like? I know it was a long time ago, but do you have any memories of arriving in the States and how
Absolutely.
you did?
Yeah, I do have many memories. It was very tough in the beginning. I was a active kid with a lot to say, and I was just pointing at things, trying to make friends, definitely not understanding what the class wanted and what the teachers wanted. But a couple months, I already, forgot Portuguese and I was speaking English. So
Sorry, I just missed that little bit at the end. So you weren't sure what the class was saying, but then you eventually learned how to speak English?
yes, yeah. And in the
Right.
beginning, it was a hard transition, but they say that in a couple months, I was speaking English and already had forgotten Portuguese.
Oh, and go back to Brazil at the age of 10. Did you have to
Yeah,
relearn these or was
abs-
it?
yeah, absolutely. I was definitely, I spoke like a gringo and like had an accent and stuff, but I was fortunate that it was young enough that I was able to relearn Portuguese and can now speak without an accent and stuff. So it's great to be able to speak both.
Yeah, nice. So how do you think Brazil influenced you in terms of particularly musically? You think of Brazil and you think of such a rich music scene and such a rich music heritage. what were you hearing? What, like, if you turned the radio on or in your peer group, what were you hearing that really sort of influenced you and pushed you towards music?
That's a very interesting question because if I'm being honest, Brazil didn't really influence me almost in anything up to the point where I got to music school and I was interested in jazz. And music school in Brazil, they're definitely dedicating a lot to jazz, but also to Brazilian music. And that's when I was like, wow, I play like a foreigner. I don't have the 16th note groove because I grew up listening to punk rock and rock and all those things. Like I was listening to American music, honestly, Southern Californian punk, and I grew up listening to country and all those hits, and I had nothing of like Brazilian music in me. So I had to go in and
Wow.
just do a deep dive and get that going, you know.
And so how do you play? I think you mentioned that you played like a foreigner. I can't remember the exact words, but you didn't play like a Brazilian. How do you play like a Brazilian? What are the sort of the key things?
I must say, it's just kind of like, you know, playing like a jazz musician. It's just some people just have that accent. When you grow up in New York and you're living that every day, you're going to have that jazz swing and that accent. And Brazil, same thing. It's a lot about 16th notes and dislocating them however way possible, really. It's less triplet based like jazz and more 16th note based, and usually the last 16th note of the beat and the second 16th note of a beat, so it's almost like never on that one per se. So
Right.
yeah.
How long did it take you to get your head around that?
I was always really good with rhythm, so I always loved funk and American music, and that's very rhythmic too, and that's 16th notes, but in a different way. So I just had to really start, you know, transcribing and learning grooves and really just that's how you hear, that's how you listen to, you know, that's how you learn the language,
Yeah.
repeating what a native person says. If you repeat after someone who has an accent, what's going to happen is you're going to pick up that accent. So you have to go straight to the source, which are the
Right.
records. Records say everything, not books, you know, not PDFs or whatever. It's just the music.
Yeah. So who are you? What records were you turning to? Who were you listening to?
Well, in terms of Brazilian music, definitely Tom Jobim is the master of everything. So um, anything from him is just a school of harmony, melody, and rhythm. Just all of
Okay.
it.
Right. And what even pushed you? What even gave you that passion for the guitar?
I must say, it was just back in the day seeing bands like The Offspring and Green Day and
Right.
Blink 182 and how cool they looked
Yeah.
playing music. So it kind of started as a visual cool thing, like, oh, that is so cool. I want to be like them. And then away from that kind of music, once I kind of mastered it in the playing sense and I could play all the records and I wanted more of a challenge. So I went into more of a technical rock and metal stuff. They had solos, they had hard riffs. And then what happened was I kept researching these amazing guitarists like John Petrucci from Dream Theater, and everybody, they all had one thing in common. They all studied jazz at some point. So I was
Right.
like, man, they keep talking about jazz, 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 jazz. And that was the biggest challenge of my life, like trying to, you know, learn and play jazz.
Gotcha. And but you did very well at it. You actually even got a scholarship to go and study in New York. So you must really have dedicated yourself to it.
Absolutely. All day, every day. I love the freedom of being able, like, what fascinates me about jazz is just the freedom of improvisation. Just like we're speaking right now, I have words in my head and I'm putting them along to create this conversation with you. And that's what improvising is. But you have to, you know, master your instrument so well that you can do that
Yeah.
on the spot with other musicians. And it's a conversation, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen or heard or experienced. So I absolutely loved the feeling of being free. It took me so many years, but when I was finally flowing through the fretboard and stuff, it just was magnificent.
Nice. So I'm really interested in how that background informs the work you do today. Do you think it's a benefit having had that musical education? Because I assume there are probably some mastering engineers or studio professionals who perhaps haven't come from that intense a musical background. The fact that you did, how do you think that sort of seeps into your work, particularly in the mastering field?
Honestly, I think it's just, it plays an important role, like such an important role in how I hear. Everything that I've worked on musically up to now adds up to how I hear music, and everybody hears differently, right? Every, just has their way of hearing, and it's all based on any. And I feel like my years of dedicating to music and transcribing and really working with my ears in terms of like notes and harmony made me a much better mastering engineer, because notes and frequencies, they're all the same, really. 200 hertz is a note. So there is to mastering, because each song is going to be in its own key, and therefore the notes will be moving around, and musical aspect of playing an instrument, but also being part of production and recording and mixing, like being through all those stages and having at some point dedicated to that in my life, I've really worked my ears to think almost like an arranger as well. So I think of mastering almost like arranging too, because this is, I'll do a very short example on how I hear things. Like if you have like a set of backing vocals and the main melody, let's say, is on the fifth, and you have their root, third, fifth, and another root, the notes that I choose to bring back, to push back into the mix or bring out, they lots of times depend on like what I'm hearing that's interfering with the melody, right? So if I hear a certain frequency that's just jumping out and I tuck it back in, and let's just say that's the minor third or the major third, I'm actually creating a space in the mix where the root and the fifth are perfectly, it's called a perfect fifth for a reason. It has that kind of parallel motion, and I'm taming the which is something I find fascinating. But I'm almost acting as a producer slash arranger in that sense. Like if you guys play electric guitar, you'll know that if you play like a minor chord with distortion, everything will sound there's so many harmonics hitting each other that it'll sound almost muddy. But if you play a power chord, it's very clean. So several times during the mastering process, I'm pushing back on instruments and bringing things out in a way that's clearing things up and separating instruments. And that's all notes, really.
That's so interesting. So when did that even become apparent to you? When did you start to realize that that's what mastering is, and I really am interested in it?
I must say that was a very recent thing. It came from a lot of actually working on it and actually mastering and starting to notice things that I was doing and starting to understand a little bit more of my style. It just has to be with, really just flight hours. Like when you're training to be a pilot, you gotta I think of it all, every single work that I do, I think of it as flight hours, just more hours in the air, just doing it and practicing. And that's what is missing from doing it to a point where you're understanding yourself so well, so right. It wasn't too long ago that I started noticing how my ear training for notes helped me in mastering.
So interesting. Wow. So you've got this background in guitar, particularly jazz guitar, and you're in New York and you're studying, but then at some point you make the decision that perhaps you want to go into the studio world. And I understand I think you spent about a year kind of looking at engineering and producing, if I've got that correct, before deciding that mastering you wanted to sort of focus. What was it about mastering that really grabbed you?
I think in the beginning, since I'm such a creative in the sense that I've been playing guitar and being a musician for most of my life, I always had it in the back of my mind that mastering was quite boring. It wasn't as creative. There wasn't as many options to do things with, like mixing, how you can work with reverbs and delays and all that stuff. But I started becoming fascinating with how much change you could imply in a song just using the stereo mix, right? So it's almost handcuffing yourself to, this is what you have, but there's so much beautiful stuff that happens there where you're, you know, you're like bringing the vocals forward, but pulling the snare back, like pushing the snare back into the mix, or you're somehow enhancing the kick, but taming the bass. And I just always found that fascinating. So I got a hold of that. I was like, oh, wow, I like the challenge. I love how also, just like going into jazz with guitar, for me, it's like one of the biggest challenges you can do as a musician. I feel like mastering is very challenging as well, because, you know, it's just you're handcuffing yourself to that stereo file, and you're not able to just that backing vocal. You're understanding, oh, that backing vocal is at about 312 hertz, and I want to just like push that back into the mix a little, so let me tame that. So it's a challenge, and I love it.
Yeah, and it's so much more involved than I think a lot of people, myself included, realize. Just that I guess that initial thought you had that perhaps mastering is perhaps not as important as the producing or the mixing, whereas in actual fact, it's a very crucial key last role to it.
Yeah, and I think there's this slight misconception that in mastering, you know, you're just checking levels and that's it. Obviously, when mixes are incredible, you're doing less because more might ruin it. And I think there's always a contribution that I'm making to the way I hear music based on what I've gotten from the mixer and the client and in general of what they want. So I feel like I always have something to add or to contribute. And sometimes it takes longer for me to realize what that is, because every song is a puzzle piece. And sometimes it's very apparent what I need to do. And others, I have to sit with it to see what certain elements of the track are telling me that I need to work on.
Gotcha. So in terms of starting up with Dale Becker, moving to Becker Mastering, how did that, how did you, did you have to have a job interview? Like, how do you even go about getting your way into Becker Mastering?
Yeah, that's an interesting story, because we had just moved out to LA with, you know, the goal of pursuing our music dreams. And I had already become very interested in mastering to a point where I was dedicating my business to mastering. I started with, you know, kind of doing it all. I'll record you, mix you, master you, and then you're ready. And I really hated that process. It was very important to go through all that, I feel like, but I hated being the, you know, one-stop shop, and, you know, tracking just wasn't my thing. So I was just already decided that I loved mastering, and I was investing in gear and equipment and trying to get things better right before we moved to LA. So I was listening to a lot of podcasts on mastering, and almost every single person they interviewed, their number one tip was find a mentor. Just find a mentor, find a mentor. And I just knew that that was going to be super important. So I started even journaling, like, hey, I don't know how I'm going to do this. LA is like one of the biggest cities in the world, the most competitive. That's where the music industry is, like, all the engineers are here. And a mentor, I don't know. I just kept journaling about it and just visualizing it until as soon as we moved out, we were a part of a songwriting course with other musicians. And I met one person who happens to be the person that kind of runs the Becker mastering business, Ryan. And she mentioned, hey, I'm working on my music, and it's an R&B thing, and I work with a mastering engineer, and he's going to help me out. And I was like, whoa. Did you say mastering engineer? And she's like, did you say mastering engineer? because like everybody in LA is all about producing and mixing, and it's so rare to find mastering engineers, especially young mastering engineers. So she was like, "Oh my God, you're interested in mastering? We need so much help. The studio's starting to get really busy." So at the time, I don't think Dale was even really interested in like, because you know what, bringing another person adds to like, you know, your stress life, because it's more mistakes, all these things. So I was like, look, I don't even need to work there. If I could just shadow him for a few months, that's it. And then I'm on my own. Like, I just want to learn for someone who's actually doing it. So he was fine with it. We met and I was just shadowing him. And a couple weeks went by. And throughout those weeks, every once in a while, we'd get so busy that he'd ask me to check something. And then I'd find a mistake or I'd find a click. So I proved myself very useful in those first 2 or 3 weeks. And within the first 2 or 3 weeks, they actually offered me a position. And I was
Wow.
like, oh, I wasn't even expecting this. I just wanted to learn from you. So that's how it happened. And I've been there for almost 3 years.
Wow. So what did you learn? What are some of the key things in those first few weeks when you're shadowing Dale? What did you notice that he did that you still lives with you today and you learn from?
I must say, oh, oh, sorry, you broke up there, but I got the gist
I'm
of it.
sorry. I'll ask again. It was
Yeah, I
just.
must say
Uh,
oh, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. I think our internet's delaying a little bit. I was just asking what you saw Dale do in those first couple of weeks that you learned from and still stick with you to this day.
Yeah, I must say, the most important things that still stick with me are nothing to do with actually working on the music and actually doing the mastering. It was more the work ethic and, you know, the grind and hustle of just being there. Um, just the way you answer your clients via email. There's so many people that take that for granted and just like treat their customers and A&Rs and you know, um, labels like crap. And just the way he was going about that very professionally really stuck with me. And it was something that really aligned with my own philosophy and how I was, you know, leading my business. So I think just the professionalism and the just like every single track you receive is just as important as every other track.
Mm.
So that was what I got from it, you know.
Yeah, which is great advice. What do you think? What is the first step then when a new song or a new album comes in terms of your role? So, for example, um, the Kid Laroi. I know you worked on some releases by the Kid Laroi. What happens when those files arrive in the studio? What's your next step?
So right now the studio has grown so much and like at an unprecedented rate that I'm not even part of the intake anymore because I'm actually mastering all day.
Wow.
So back in the day with the Kid Laroi and Doja Cat, I definitely was a very big part of that. So obviously, just the intake part is super important. Prepping the session, making sure we have all the files, kind of poking through and making sure, you know, everything is looking and sounding great, and that we have everything we need in order to get things going. But man, we've grown so much that ever since I joined, we've added like 4 new people. So we
Wow.
right now have like 3 people at all times prepping sessions and working on alts. And me and Dale are just banging out masters all day. And I'm helping him with settings when we have, you know, a lot of songs. Or I'm in charge of mastering a part of the intake as well. So it's just been a wild ride.
Yeah. When did you get to the point where you were comfortable with that, where you felt like, yeah, I can do this?
Honestly, it started about a year and a half ago. And I just felt like when I started being able to master there for real and checking with Dell at the end and all that stuff, I was ready already. So I wasn't even slightly nervous. I just felt like I had been doing it for so long with my own business and just really trying to show Dell, hey, I'm ready for this. I'm ready for this. So when it came time to put on that jersey, I just felt like it was second nature, honestly. I had no, jitters, or I'm nervous about this, or whatever. I just felt like, hey, I have a sound, I have a voice, so to speak, in mastering, and it's time to use it.
Nice. And I've seen that you prefer the term mastering artist as opposed to mastering engineer. What does mastering artist represent to you?
That to me represents similar to what I was saying, where being a part of the beginning of making music, like from the beginning stages all the way to the end, has, led me to hear music at that final stage, as an artist as well. And I think that the engineers that are too engineering, strictly by the book, oh, you can't do this because of this, you know, phasing thing or this and that, you're not actually hearing the music. So
Mm.
obviously there's a set of rules that you should be aware of to then forget, right? I'm a total, I support knowing every thing there is about something and then letting it go, and then just doing what the work is. So I feel like people that get too engineering get too stuck in their head, and it sounds like that in the music. It sounds kind of stale. It sounds sterile in a way. So I tend to listen to it as an artist.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, in terms of your own business, I mean, you're already doing 4 days a week with Becker Mastering, but then you've got your own mastering business as well. When did you set that up?
Well, that's been set up even before, I got to Dale. Like I wanted to find a mentor to learn more. But like I said, my plan was just to maybe shadow someone for a couple months and then take that stuff and keep working on my stuff. So I never really stopped that. That already existed. And it's just the evolution, of course, has been much faster from like being in such a high-end studio at a high-end level, having to, get that workload. It's just the flight hours really were accelerated,
Mm.
um, with that. So ever since I've been doing even more of this, it's just a constant craziness. Sometimes I'm clocking out, at the Beckers at 7 and I'm working till 9 on a couple masters. So just because I'm there for 4 weeks doesn't mean that I'm not doing my own things those days. It's just every
Right.
day, all the time.
Wow.
It's what you got to do.
And I think with your own business, you've had the opportunity to work with more Brazilian artists. Is that correct? I know that recently the band Yota Quest, I think,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm pronouncing that correctly, their single, and I'll need your help with the pronunciation, but Te Supera, you mastered
Yeah.
that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting because they are such a legendary pop rock band. And I grew up listening to them. I think the second song I learned how to play on the guitar was one of their hits. So when I got the call to work on their music, I was like, wow, that's amazing. So my business has been growing a lot in Brazil, not only from like just the connections, but I've had a couple really important that have just been like spreading the word out. One of them is an amazing mixer, Pedro Peixoto. He's been with me for like 10 years. I mean, we've been friends for like 10 years, and we've learned together. They were building a studio a couple of years before I got interested in audio. So every question I ever had in the beginning, I would ask him. And then the world just goes round and round. And years later, I'm mastering everything that he works on. He even has, he's like my biggest, I don't know, he just fights for me a lot because even in his email and his contract, it just states that if you're going through him, the master is going to be sent to me. So
Wow.
already separate the budget there. So because he sees his sound as my sound is an extension of his sound, and so on and so forth. So um, it's just been a really cool partnership. And that's the guy who mixed that amazing song. And I've been getting great work from that's been coming from him.
Yeah, that's how important is that relationship with the mixer? Is that quite unusual to have such a tight relationship like you do with Pedro?
No, I think that's how you create legendary sounding tracks that have a consistency to them. If you look at, you know, the people Dale works with, we have Jeff Ellis, John Castelli. We just have some mixers that are just like, we're sending it to Becker, you know,
Mm.
that's where we're sending it to. And you know what they want, and it just, they understand that their sound, like, you are an extension of their sound. So that's been happening a lot more lately. And you'll have mixers that are just fighting for your sound, because they understand that it's very important. If you just send it to someone else, it's kind of like starting from scratch and trying to they're going to understand you and all that stuff. So I've just noticed that those partnerships are super important in music.
Yeah. What do you think is your trademark sound, if there is such a thing?
Sorry, I lost you there for a second. Can you repeat that?
I'm sorry. I was going to say, what do you think is your trademark sound, if there is such a thing?
That's a good question. I mean, I like things very punchy and open. I love low end. I like things very clean. So I tend to open things up and add separation in the low mids, where things kind of get really chunky. The vocals and the backing vocals and the synths and maybe the guitar, they're all kind of living in one space there. So I love polishing that up and opening it up. And I do like width and energy in the high end, but I also, my ears are pretty sensitive to that area. So I tend to have a sound that's open and bright, but smooth. So I really tend to bring out that energy without it ever being harsh, at least in my opinion. But
Yeah.
I must say, that kind of stuff, I think that's stuff I like. I like hard hitting low end, but I do feel like that's for others to judge what they think my sound is. Because to me, I hear what I hear and I do what I do, right? I don't think about it. It's just a product of my whole journey. So every time I'm something, it's just, you know, the way I hear it.
Yeah, sure. There was one other Brazilian artist that I just wanted to ask you about, and Outro, Outroeu is the name of the band, and they
Mm-hmm.
really recently released a song called "Prayer," I believe, with Lulu Santos, who's a legend in the guitaring world. What was it like for you to work on that song? And can you please correct my pronunciation of the band's name?
Oh, absolutely. O through eu would be how to pronounce that, but I don't expect anybody to just guess that, right? But yeah, Lulu has been a legend in music in Brazil. Amazing guitar player, amazing songwriter, singer, and O through eu is an up and coming band. They're really great, and they just wrote that song with Lulu. And that mixer, his name is João Millier. He's an incredible mixer. That mix sounds so good, and it was such an honor to have been a part of that, because it's just so loud and punchy, in your face. The production is absolutely gold. The producer is a guy named Tulio Airoj. He is just phenomenal. So it was such a privilege to work on that. On that specific track, I remember doing a different setting specifically for Lulu's voice, because he's such a star, and his voice sounds so different from the other singers, that I really needed a setting there to showcase that. And I think it comes with experience that you notice these things. But as soon as when I'm listening down, and as soon as I heard his voice come in the second verse, it was so much louder than the rest, kind of like in your face, that I was like, you know, this guy's the star. Maybe the mixer was just so wise to be like, hey, this is where your voice is going to sit. And I made it a point to emphasize that even more. I was like, you know what? I'm going to bring his voice out even more, because I got it. There's one guy convinced to approve this mix, and it was approved first pass. They absolutely loved it. And then I got to do the Atmos master as well. So yeah, it's a terrific song.
Nice. How are you finding Atmos?
I find it really fascinating. We're loving it over at Becker. It's just been an incredible journey, filled with, you know, being the pioneers at something is very hard, because everything's so new. Things are still full of mistakes, and then you're kind of learning to move around that and stuff. And lately what's been happening is I've been mixing a lot of Atmos actually, and Dale has been mastering what I mix, and it's been a great experience. And it's just, yeah, I honestly really love it. And we worked on the Harry Styles Atmos, mastering that. And that was the first time, I got to say, I had so many people come to me and say, hey, this sounds so much better than the stereo. Like, I'm not saying anything against the stereo. I'm just saying people have been liking what Atmos has been doing when you do it correctly. It's just, there's so much punch, there's so much breath in the low end. It sounds so beautiful. And obviously Mike Miller and John Castelli were the ones who mixed that album, and they are just phenomenal. So yeah, it's been awesome.
That's great. So I think with all you have going on mastering, as if you're not busy enough mastering, you also have your band with your wife, 500 Year Flood. How do you find time to still be creative and still exercise that artist part of your personality? Where do you fit all that in? How do you balance it?
That's a great question. I wish I knew, but I gotta say that it's really just love, for the game. I mean, game. It's just love for it. It's just passion. It's just love for the music. And also, I just am very expressive and creative, and I love working, helping them achieve their vision and better it. I always have to believe that I'm contributing in a very important way. But I also love starting something from scratch with KK, my wife, who's the singer at 500 Year Flood. And it's just a magical experience. And I just have a lot to say with these fingers too. So yeah, I love it. And you just got to find time. It's crazy. Things are getting crazier and crazier by the day. Everything is growing. The business is growing. So it's like, you just got to stay focused.
Yeah. Can you master your own music?
Yeah, I do that. Obviously, I would love to get to a point where we're sending off the mixes to someone who's, specialized in mixing, like, someone like John Castelli or Jeff Ellis. That would be amazing. So that's in the plan. But right now I've been mixing it, and then I tend to master it at a different location or just with a different perspective. Sometimes I send it to some friends just to be like, hey, what are you hearing from this? Because I've been involved in this since the creation of it all. So yeah, it's an interesting process to be involved in everything.
Yeah. Wow, you're very busy. I don't know when you find time to sleep, but clearly you do at some point. Billy, mate, thank you so much for your time.
That's the most important.
The sleep?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't recover, then it's hard to have all that, right? So I definitely try to pencil in those 8 hours when I can.
Nice. Hey, Philly, thank you so much for your time. It's been really great to chat with you. I appreciate you joining the live stream. And, I hope we get to chat again very soon.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I love what Jaxsta is doing. Love what you guys are doing. This has been a lovely. You are great at it. We can tell. So yeah, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Philly. We'll speak soon. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.